Hello, everyone out there on Facebook. Thanks for joining us today for the first of what will be a number of conversations related to the work we do at the Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation here at Georgetown University. I'm Ori Hoffer, Director of Communications here at the Beeck Center, and for those of you just being introduced to us, welcome. Let me tell you a little bit about us. Our mission is right there in the name. We generate social impact, and we're actively reimagining policies, systems, and partnerships in service of the public good. We design and test new ideas, build diverse and collaborative networks, and scale solutions that work for people. That's why we wanted to talk about the census today. First, the deadline to provide your information is about 6 weeks away on September 30th. So be ready for that. Also, a lot of people don't really know what the census is all about and how it affects their daily lives. So we wanted you to get a little bit more background on that. And for that, let's take a look at this video from the census folks that will help explain some of that.
What time is it?
Bedtime.
My wife never gets home in time to see little man go to sleep. Her bus stop is a mile away. I wish I could at least walk home with her. I'm completing the 2020 census for my family. My response can impact how public funding is spent in my community. That could mean education for little man and a closer bus stop for her.
Hey.
Shape your future. Start here. Complete the census at 2020census.gov.
Powerful stuff there from the Census Bureau. Yeah, we're trying new things here, so all kinds of interesting things happening technologically wise. But we are joined here today by two members of the Beeck Center team who have been doing a lot of work around the census for the last few months and even longer. Denice Ross is a fellow with our data and digital team, and Taylor Savell, one of our crack student analysts. Thank you both for taking the time today. Denice, let's start with you. You've been looking at the census for a long time. Why is it so important?
Yeah, thanks, Ori. It's great to be here. And thanks for showing that census ad. It always warms my heart to see different ways of telling the story about why the census is important. This is my third census, so I got involved after the 2000 census. I moved to New Orleans and worked with a nonprofit data intermediary to organize the data into neighborhoods. And there was this idea that we could democratize the data. So, the great thing about census data is it belongs to all of the people. So instead of decisions being made about communities by people in power behind closed doors, census data is available to everyone. So neighborhoods and communities can advocate on their own behalf using the data about themselves. Census data has three primary uses that are really critical for our democracy. One is that it allocates congressional seats and electoral college votes by state. And the second is that it's used by states to redistrict, so to divide up the voting districts from everything from congressional seats to school district elections. And then third, it's used for distributing tax dollars in a fair way across the states based on population formulas.
Okay, and Taylor, what drew you to the census? You were in middle school during the last one, right?
That's very true, yeah. This is my first census, but I've always been really interested in civics and government. And during my time at Georgetown, I spent a lot of time studying good governance and democratic institutions. So I thought this project would be the perfect chance not only to learn more about, but contribute to one of the pillars of American democracy, which is the census. So Georgetown's own provost, Robert Groves, actually used to head the Bureau, and he suggested that someone should investigate and share the history of the apportionment process. So for the last 7 or 8 months, with a colleague, Kevin Ackerman, I've been doing that research, and we just launched Apportionment.info, which is a web resource targeted for congressional staffers, media, and really just anyone who's interested in the census and apportionment history.
Okay, so I'll bite. Apportionment is a pretty big word. That's a good, multi-pointer in Scrabble, but what does it really mean?
Yeah, it's just a fancy way of saying divide up. So there are only 435 seats in the US House of Representatives, and they're given out based on population. So this is one reason that we need an accurate count of how many people are in the country and how many people are in each state.
Now, I got a thing in the mail months ago, and I turned around and quickly filled it out online. How many people are there still left to count?
There are a lot. There are 56 million people left to count in the United States. And we only have 6 weeks left to do it in. Just for comparison, in 2010, we only had to count door to door 48 million households, and we had 10 weeks to do it in. So, so now we have more households to count, 56 million. We have only 6 weeks to do it in, and there's a pandemic. So the stakes are really high for making sure that the Census Bureau has all the time and resources that they need to make this a complete and accurate count.
Okay, well, and if you want to know how your state is doing, you can go visit 2020census.gov/response-rates.html, and you can see, just how your state is doing. You can see which states are in dark blue, which states are in light blue and have a long way to go, and even which areas are, are way behind, like Puerto Rico. So, Denice, what happens if someone doesn't fill out their census form and the census doesn't count them?
Well, the census will try very hard to count you. I recently learned that my own sister had not yet filled out her form. I went to her apartment and she had a pile of letters from the Bureau, and they get increasingly dire. And the last postcard that she got said, "We are sending somebody to your door if you don't fill this out." So that's what the next step is the Bureau is mobilizing enumerators to walk door to door and ask people in person what their household characteristics are. So that's what you need the time and the resources to complete. So anyways, that's the thing is the Bureau walks door to door and counts whoever is remaining. And then it takes a lot of time to process the data and figure out how to fill in the gaps with administrative records and other methodologies just to make sure it's a complete and accurate count.
And Taylor, anything else you wanted to bring up about that?
No, I think Denice covered it, but just to reiterate, there's a lot at stake here, whether it's political representation, federal funding, or even just the data that so much of our work relies on.
We saw in that video at the beginning, he was talking about, this is what funds, a bus stop and education. Talk through some of the actual programs that are, affected by the census.
Sure, yeah. So there's an estimated $1.5 trillion each year that's allocated based on the census. So obviously that's a lot of money. And these funds go to a wide array of programs. So some examples are Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, Section 8 housing. But when I think about some of them that are most impactful for me, I think about paying to fix potholes on my local roads or funding local health clinics. And then finally, providing Pell Grants for students like me to attend Georgetown. So there are a lot of different programs at stake, and it's really important for all of us that our communities are accurately counted.
Okay, so clearly this is a big deal for states just beyond figuring out their seats in Congress, but how does Congress actually get the data to make this determination?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And part of our work with Apportionment.info was kind of taking this process that many of us take for granted and really looking at the individual steps. So first, it starts with our individual responses. The Census Bureau collects those, and then they're going to compile the totals for each state and use the method of equal proportions, which is basically a formula that's approved by Congress and used since 1941. And they're going to use that formula to divvy up the 435 seats in the House of Representatives. Once they have those numbers, the director of the Census Bureau is going to take the document with the state totals and the apportionment numbers And he or she is going to give them to the Secretary of Commerce, who then gives them to the President, who then passes them on to Congress. And then as the last step, the clerk of the U.S. House of Representatives takes the packet and sends a certificate to the governor of each state, letting them know how many seats they're going to have in the newly reapportioned Congress. So it's kind of a chain, but the numbers go from one person to the next until they finally get to the states.
Okay. And Denice, it's really important that, you know, the delivery of the data from the Census Bureau, getting it to Congress, that's a big part of this, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, most of what Taylor just described is required either by the Constitution or by law. But my favorite part of the apportionment data transfer is the tradition of transparency. There's always either on the day that the numbers are delivered from the Department of Commerce to the White House, or within the next day or two, those numbers are always released through a press release and usually a press briefing where the numbers are delivered to the American people. So behind you, I see flashing, we've got several decades of photos of that delivery of the numbers to the American people, where the nation's population count is revealed, and also the winners and losers for congressional seats and electoral college votes based on population shifts over the last decade.
Yeah, I mean, has this always been the case? I mean, we know that, you know, the census is in the Constitution, that, you know, all persons shall be counted, but has this process, this public process, always been part of the procedure?
Yeah, like you mentioned, the census is mandated in the Constitution. So we've had a census every decade since the first census in 1790. But in our project, we look at the last 100 years of apportionment, which is when the current apportionment system was set up in 1929. And since then, we've had 9 different presidents transmit the apportionment numbers. Some were more like than others, and they really did come pretty evenly from both sides of the aisle. However, in each decade across both Republican and Democratic administrations, the president's role has been to transmit these numbers from Congress, or from Commerce to Congress, as is, with no manipulation. So there is really a rich history and tradition of doing it this way.
Now, the census has been in the news lately, and not just because we clearly need to boost those response numbers. Once again, go to, what is it? What is the site to fill out your census form?
Oh, my2020census.gov. Is that right, Taylor?
I wanted to remind people of that if you haven't already filled it out. But the census has been in the news for a number of other reasons in the past few weeks, one of which President Trump issued a memorandum earlier looking to exclude undocumented immigrants in the apportionment numbers. And how does that compare to this tradition of taking the data and just transferring it wholly over to Congress?
It would be unprecedented. And as many legal experts have already noted, manipulating apportionment would be unconstitutional. But it doesn't take a law degree to understand what counting the whole number of persons in each state means. That's written into the Constitution. So even if it were okay to manipulate the numbers and subtract out undocumented immigrants, there are no solid data on undocumented immigrants in the United States by nature of their undocumented status. So the assumptions and sampling and estimations that would be needed to get these numbers would be such a far cry from the quote unquote actual enumeration that's required by the Constitution.
And, you know, obviously we are living in unprecedented times due to COVID-19, where we haven't seen a situation like this. What has that meant for the census? Is everything on track for this handover of data in December?
No, we have a larger workload than we've ever had, 56 million households left to be counted, and a shorter time frame to do it in, just 6 weeks, because Congress hasn't granted an extension to the statutory reporting deadlines. due to the pandemic. So we're really just up against the calendar, and more than half of the households that remain to be counted in the door-to-door enumeration are in current COVID hotspots. So just think about the challenges of being a census enumerator, walking through a community that feels under siege from the virus. Schools have been canceled. There's restaurants aren't open. Group gatherings are prohibited. And many people are afraid to go to the grocery store for fear of catching the virus. And here you've got someone you don't know knocking on your door, asking you to fill out this form. So enumerators really have an uphill battle in these communities that have higher COVID rates right now. And so the bottom line for this is that the census needs more time. If you think about it, we've got 6 weeks left. If you've been watching the pandemic, the numbers, when a community spikes in terms of its COVID rates, it usually takes about 2 cycles of the virus, like 4 weeks, to tamp those numbers down to a more manageable community level. So if it takes 4 weeks to tamp it down, and we've got 6 weeks to enumerate the whole country, the numbers just aren't in our favor.
And so, Taylor, how has the Census Bureau tried to address some of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So back in April, we actually saw the Census Bureau Director, Dillingham, and Commerce Secretary Ross. They released a statement saying, well, we're gonna continue field data collection, so that's like the door knocking that we're thinking of, into October 31st. And then they also asked Congress to pass a 4-month extension for transmitting the numbers. So that would mean that the numbers that were scheduled to be transmitted by the end of the year would actually be transmitted by the end of April. But as Denice mentioned, that extension hasn't happened yet. It has widespread support from Census Bureau officials, advocacy groups, experts such as statisticians and demographers, but Congress still hasn't passed it. It's been included in a couple pieces of legislation, but none that have made it all the way through. So that's really the most critical point right now, is that we need Congress to pass that 4-month extension.
So in the meantime, what can people out there do? What should they be doing to ensure that the census, goes off the way it should?
Yeah, I think there are 2 big action items, and then I'll see if Denice has anything else. But the first thing I would say is that make sure to fill out your census form if you haven't already, and encourage your friends, your family, your neighbors to do so as well. The sooner, the better, obviously. So you can fill it out online at my2020census.gov. You can also fill it out by phone by calling one of the toll-free numbers, or by mail. The online form is even mobile friendly, and it should take less than 10 minutes. I think mine honestly took less than 5. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I think that we all should be doing is contacting our senators and representatives and encouraging them to support the census deadline extension. As I mentioned, a fair and accurate count is so critical for our communities, and congressional action is really the best way to ensure that the Bureau has enough time to thoroughly complete counting, and then also do robust quality checks and data processing. So that would be my second item.
Fantastic. Denice, anything to add there?
No, I think we covered everything. One thing I do want to add is just extreme gratitude for the career staff in the Census Bureau, because this count has just had so many headwinds working against it, and the career staff have been creative and just super dedicated to making this the best count that they can possibly have. And now you have a divergence between what the professionals in the census have said that they need to have a complete and accurate count, and what the political leadership are saying that they'll give them in terms of time.
Okay. So with that, I think that's a perfect place to end this first Facebook Live event. Denice and Taylor, thank you both so much for taking the time. I can't wait to see what other pieces of information we'll be getting from you, Taylor, as part of your research in the coming months. For everyone who was out there watching, thank you for joining us, and be sure to follow us on all of our social media outlets, not just here on Facebook. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. We even have a TikTok page in case you are so inclined. So that's all for now, everyone. Make sure you go and fill out your census form if you haven't done it already, and have a fantastic rest of your day.